All right. Good evening. Welcome to the Alberta Softball Umpires Association webinar number 2 for the 2020 season. Chris and I will be covering the pre and post game conversation. And I just want to thank Lynn Muse. This was a comment that was, or a suggestion that she had for us to cover this. And in case you don't know who I am, I'm Frankie Billingsley, one of your education co-chairs, originally from Edmonton, Softball Canada Level 5, and my co-educator.
And I'm Chris Hartley from Calgary and achieved my Level 5 last season. So today our agenda, we're gonna kind of cover the plate umpire responsibilities, the tone of the meeting, pre-game topics. Those are going to focus mostly on the pre-game side of things. And then from a post-game standpoint, we'll look at some discussion suggestions. We'll sum it all up and we'll have a question and answer period here. So again, depending on what we have for questions, will dictate the length of this meeting type thing.
Okay. So the plate umpire is responsible for the flow and the tempo of the game. And because of that, they really do bear a lot of responsibility to set the crew up for success and to make sure that the 2, 3, or 4, or 5, or 6 people that are going out on the diamond really have a team attitude. And prepare. So failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And I would just put this little mantra in that Chris and I spoke about in our last webinar, which is really try to prepare, expect the unexpected. The tone of the meeting is also set by the plate umpire, and I think it's really important to just start thinking about this should be conversational in nature. All crew members should participate. Because the plate umpire is responsible for the flow and the tempo, it's incumbent upon them, because they are more involved in the game, to make sure that they cover the topics that they need to in order to feel comfortable. But as we go through the topics that I cover in my pregame, you'll notice that there are a lot of things that might come up that people may not agree with. So you have to be comfortable to negotiate. And this is why we talk about these things before the game. The plate umpire should not be this should not be a dictatorship. It shouldn't be like my way or it's the highway. When you bring these things up, it's an opportunity for you to have a conversation with your partners about how you're going to handle different situations when they come up. And the reason that you want to do this before the game is because there might be differences of opinion, and it would be better for the crew to know beforehand that there are differences of opinion, rather than waiting for things to happen on the diamond and realizing, oh, umpire A wants to handle this one way and umpire B wants to handle it a totally different way. So, and then the last thing I'm going to say before I go through these topics is, 1, the pregame meeting is really important, and I think people underestimate its value, to the point where I had someone sit in on one of my pregame meetings during the 2018 World Championship that I was at. And it wasn't until after that championship was over that I realized that people that were on the Olympic shortlist were being evaluated about how they prepared their crews for a game. So, I mean, this is a really important part of your toolkit. The second thing I would say, this pregame I'm about to go through is the one that I do now when I'm working with people at a really high level that I haven't worked with a lot. So, but it's also evolved over time. Like, this is something that I've put together over, like, this pregame I added something to it after I came back from New Zealand. So this is like a 20-year evolution in process. So you can take it and use it. But all I would suggest to you is that this pregame came out of situations that I myself actually went through. And so your pregame will be a little bit more authentic once you start gaining experiences yourself. So with no further ado, the topics that I cover are, do you know your partners or not? This is really something that you need to know going onto the diamond, because if you're going to do an Edmonton ladies softball game with a Terry Richter or a Frank Omo or a Mike Semchuk, the pregame is different than if I'm at a world championship working with 4 people I don't know. So I'm going to do this as if that I'm at a world championship with people I don't know, because many of you might be preparing for your first provincial, your first Western, and you might be working with people that you don't know. It's important to know if there's protocols before the game and after. Your umpire in chief will go through, do you have to enter the diamond a certain way? Do you have to be at the diamond a certain time? Do you have to check equipment? You should know this because you don't want to be late. You don't want to get to the diamond and not know what you're doing. You don't want to seem like the administrative part of the game is going to take you off guard. So the actual content of what I would cover with my partners, there are times in fast pitch and slow pitch where the ball is hit so sharply in the infield and an infielder is going to catch the ball. Sometimes the plate umpire doesn't know if it's been caught straight away or if it's skipped off the ground. And I like to talk to my partners on the bases and say, hey, if it's really close to the ground and I look at you, it's because I don't know if it's been caught. So if you give me a signal below your waist with a closed fist, that would really help me out. That's something I talk about. Check swings. I have seen numerous times where a plate umpire will come out and ask a base umpire about whether or not the batter has swung, and the base umpire is not even looking. I saw this at a Canadian championship, and it was bottom of the 7th inning, 2 out, bases loaded, 3-2 count, and the third base umpire was watching the runner. And the plate umpire had to ask the base umpire twice about whether or not the batter swung. And it didn't matter what they answered. At this point, the other team was going to be livid because the perception was that they weren't listening. So you should talk about how you do your check swing mechanics so that your base umpires know what to expect and they are ready for it. So whether it's you just come out, you're deliberate, you make eye contact, whatever, I actually come out and I say my partner's first name. And the reason that I want to talk about it is I don't want them to be caught off guard when I come out and say, Chris, because some people aren't expecting that. In some championships, they will use a clock. It's important to cover whose responsibilities are what. At the World Championship level, there's a clock that the second base umpire is responsible for, and it controls the pitcher. They have got to release the ball within 20 seconds. Conferencing. So Chris and I did a webinar on conferencing. This is something I cover in the pregame, and it's really short and simple. If we have to get together, could I please ask that one of the following 2 things, if not both, exist? 1, that you're willing to change your mind, and 2, that you think somebody has information you don't have. It's really simple. And I'm so glad I cover that, because if you don't, you could have somebody bringing your crew together numerous times during the game when it's not necessary. Dead balls. Chris covered this one during our conferencing seminar. I like to cover in the pregame that if a batter is hit with a pitched ball, or if they're hit, they go to hit the ball and they foul it off and hit themselves, I don't want my base umpires to wait for me. If they see it, I want them to call a dead ball right away. And the reason that I talk about that is because there are times in a game where a coach or a player may feel that the ball hit them, and they might not think I've had the best view of it. But if I cover it in the pregame and I've said, no, my partners would have killed that play if they'd seen it because we talked about it, you alleviate another conversation. I think it's important for when you're doing multiple umpire systems, 3 or 4 umpire system, and you've got an umpire that will go out on fly balls, it's important for everybody to know, are they going to communicate that they're going out? How are they going to do that? Is it eye contact? Is it tapping the chest? Is it putting their hand up? Is it going? Whatever. It's important for people to know before they go out on the diamond how they're going to do that. I like to talk about illegal pitches. If we have one, if a base umpire has an illegal pitch, the other base umpires should mirror it. I also like to talk about what the responsibilities are. So the plate umpire is responsible for the hands and the paws, and the base umpires are responsible for the feet. This is really important to cover because I've seen umpires calling illegal pitches for things that are outside of their responsibility, and watching the game, the umpires on the diamond don't know how to talk to each other about the fact that they've got they've got people that are delving into a realm that they shouldn't be, and they don't know how to address it on the diamond. So talk about it in your pregame. I also like to talk to my partners about what my routine is so that they are accustomed to when can they anticipate that I will be showing or communicating outs, you know, when I just like to talk about that. So I talk about, you know, after there's an out, I will put my mask back on, and before I step behind the catcher, I will signal the outs to the third base umpire and then the first base umpire. If there's another umpire on the diamond, the first and third base umpires can talk to the second base umpire. If it's just a 2-umpire system, then I'll just flash my outs over to the umpire that's at first base or wherever they happen to be on the diamond. But I just find that I like to talk about that because a lot of partners will just be standing there showing you how many outs there are, and I would rather they know when I'm going to communicate so that they're not waiting for me. They're anticipating when I'm going to communicate so that they're not standing there waiting with 2 fingers on their, you know, 2 out, 2 out, 2 out. No, I know, I just haven't gotten to you yet. Obstruction interference is something I like to cover in the pregame from the perspective that if we have a collision on the diamond, I think that it's important to talk about as a crew, philosophically, do we want to let those calls reside slowly with the umpire that is closest to the play, or are we comfortable for perhaps somebody else coming up with a call after they've given the closest umpire an opportunity to have a call? I call these crew saving calls, and it's important to talk about it. Something that I added to my pregame after the New Zealand World Championship I was just at in February is that where you have a collision between the bases, you have a potential of having 2 umpires have 2 different calls. And so in those instances, I would suggest I've added to my pregame that the umpire who's receiving the players should have the first opportunity to make a call. So
yeah, if I could just add to what Frankie talked about, the illegal pitches, right? Like she mentioned, the base umpires have the feet, and the plate umpire has the paws and the hands and stuff like that. And of course, the plate umpire also has like the shoot, you know, so because they're looking at it directly on. So, you know, again, it's important that people know so that people aren't going outside of their area of focus and maybe calling something that's not their call. So again, it's just make sure you're all on the same page.
Well, yeah, thanks, Chris. The shoot is also the plate umpires. And, you know, one of the things that I've added to my pregame as well related to illegal pitches, because the pause is such a major point of emphasis in international ball, that I've actually added to my pregame, okay, these are the plate umpire responsibilities with illegal pitches. These are the base umpire responsibilities. But saying that, if you're at first or third base and you think the pitcher isn't pausing long enough, come and tell me. You know, sometimes we are nervous, or, you know, we're doing a really, really big game and we're so focused on calling balls and strikes that sometimes that other stuff just, we're not focused on it. So I do talk about that in the pregame, just to say, listen, early on in the game, if you feel like the pitchers aren't pausing long enough, please come and tell me. And then they are giving me the opportunity, it's my call. And also after the game, if it comes up in the post game, they can say, well, I did talk to Frankie, and whether or not I use that information, that's up to me. So thanks, Chris, that's correct. I also like to talk about the pace of the game in the pregame, because every evaluation, whether it's local, provincial, Western, national, international, there's a segment on the evaluation that talks about the pace of the game, which refers to the flow, the tempo, hustling players, keeping the game going. And I like to talk about this because there are often times, if you don't talk about it, where you have 2, 3, or 4 umpires that are all trying to hustle the players. And I think if I was a player, I would be irritated to no end by that. So I like to talk about, listen, as the plate umpire, I think it's my responsibility to keep the players going. Saying that, if I am involved in a substitution or a conversation with a coach and the players are congregating and you think I'm almost finished, feel free as one base umpire to go over and get the congregation separated so that we can get the game going. In addition to that, we now have the delay, the defensive delay in Softball Canada. So if we have had the defense ask for a congregation, whichever umpire is responsible for granting that will also be the umpire to say, that's your defensive delay for the inning. So it's important that we get those messages correct. That's sort of what I mean by player conferences there. Rotationally, I do think it's important when you're in a 3 or 4 umpire system to cover the 1 or 2 scenarios where when U2 or U3 goes out and we have multiple plays on the infield and U2 or U3 may have to go back to another position, it's important to cover those just to refresh everyone's memory. This is the scenario. This is what happens. These are the things that would be in place when U2 or U3 has to go back. It's just good for us. There's very few instances where that happens, so it's good to cover them just so we talked about it and everybody's on the same page. Rundowns. You know, I cover this every single pregame, and I'm so glad I do, because the games where I have not been the plate umpire and we maybe haven't had time to cover, because it's, you know, it's a conversation, but it's not my game. So you don't interject. You let the plate umpire kind of talk about the things they want to talk about. Sometimes you don't have time to talk about all the things that you might want to talk about. But a rundown, you should cover how you're going to cover that situation. So the mechanic is that you have one umpire on the inside and one on the outside. And there are often times where you end up with 2 umpires on the same side because they're either A, not looking at one another, they're not talking to one another, neither one of them has communicated that they're there. So it's really important that you at least talk about, this is how we do a rundown mechanically, and this is what we may do to communicate with one another on the diamond should this happen, to make sure that we have proper coverage in the proper positions. And one of the last things I like to talk about is the teams and tendencies. When you're at a tournament, when you're at a big money tournament, or when you're at a provincial, a Western, a national, or an international competition, as you get deeper into the tournament, the teams will have given you the opportunity to learn some of their tendencies. And you should also know, are you going into a game where this is the top team versus the bottom team? Are these the 2 bottom teams? Are these the top 2 teams? Do you have a crossover game? Is there any history between these 2 teams? These are really important things to cover so that your crew feels completely prepared going on to the diamond. And just quickly, with regard to this, when I was at a World Championship in 2016, it was the last day of the round robin, and as we were going out to the diamond, I said to the crew, just so you know, this game between China and Cuba, the winner goes into the pool with the United States, and I don't think either team wants to go in that pool. Well, wouldn't you know? That's all I said. But as the game unfolded, both teams ended up accusing the other of trying to intentionally lose. So, I mean, at least we had talked about what the outcome of the game was going to mean. So it's important to talk about that when you're at a long tournament.
Yeah, so thanks, Frankie. And so now we're going to kind of transition now towards more of the post-game side of things. And looking at the discussion part of it. So how it relates to the pregame is, the post-game discussion is very essential for improvement. It's a continuation of the pregame, because in our pregame, we've built up rapport if we're working with individuals that we don't work with that often. So we start to build that rapport up, got to know them a little bit, understanding our tendencies or our routines that we might have. We've opened up those communication lines, and we developed a game plan that will make us successful or increase our chances of being successful for the game that we're about to go umpire in that pregame. And that carries over to the post-game side of things after the fact, because we're doing the same thing. We're working together to develop and improve ourselves. we reevaluate our game plan that we had developed to see, did we follow through with what we wanted to accomplish? Were we able to officiate successfully the game plan that we had created prior to going out onto the field? Without a pregame happening, there is no guarantee that the crew was on the same page to begin with. So it's very hard to debrief after the game if you weren't on the same page to begin with. And I just put a little note on that right-hand side there about a tough game must be processed to avoid a downward spiral for umpires involved, especially less experienced umpires. Whether this, like, if there's a really tough game that happens, maybe certain umpires or the whole umpiring crew really struggle, it needs to be processed at some point. It might not happen immediately. It might, you might want to take the 24-hour rule or some of that and just, again, let emotions calm down so that you can have a productive meeting. But it does definitely need to be talked about as a crew. A little different in some sports. Like, I know Frankie does basketball. I do baseball and hockey, as well as softball. And, from a baseball standpoint, there's usually one umpire on the field that's the crew chief. If you're watching some of the Major League Baseball that's going on right now, there's always a crew chief that when they have the video review, regardless of, they're always involved in the video review, and then the umpire that made the call is involved. So as a crew chief, or maybe you're the plate umpire in softball, or maybe you're the more experienced umpire, whatever it might be, depending on the situation, it's really important that the debrief of that really tough game is completed at some point. Because if it's not, it could lead to an umpire start to do a downward spiral and lose confidence and second guess themselves all the time, which could just have that snowball effect so that it ends up being a negative pathway. So I'm going to cover kind of 5 post-game discussion strategies. Some of these strategies could be related if you were a supervisor or evaluator. I know in the Western Hockey League, we use the term officiating coach, and it's a term that I like to use even as an umpire evaluator. You're not evaluating, you're coaching the officials. But a little difference between a supervisor or officiating coach that's up in the stands taking tons of notes compared to if you're on the diamond with your fellow crew, with your fellow umpires. They're similar, but it's different because obviously you don't have a notepad and you're not able to write down all the stuff that you have to go over. So the first thing that you need to do is know what to cover. Much like a pregame, Frankie has her pregame routine. From a postgame standpoint, you want to have a routine as well. Is there certain things that you always lead with? The reason for the routine is so that you don't miss something, because you've just been out on the diamond for an hour and a half, 2 hours or longer, depending on the game situation. And, it's maybe been extra innings, really stressful, lots of intensity. You're physically and mentally exhausted when you come off the diamond because you've had to work hard for the last hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it might be. And if you don't have that routine, you have a tendency to sometimes your mind will lapse and you'll forget. And it's really important to have that routine so that you cover the most important things or the key decisions that happened during the game that need to be covered. Recognize that the post game is an opportunity for growth. That's our mindset whenever we have a post game debrief or discussion with our fellow umpires or with a supervisor. If you have a supervisor, it's an opportunity for growth. That is the sort of mentality that you should walk into those things for, in whatever role you are, whether you are leading that discussion or you're just one of the participants or you're the supervisor. The whole mentality should be is that this is a growth opportunity for those officials. By planning ahead and having that routine and figuring out the few things that are really important. As an umpire, you're ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to learn and grow in that situation. The second thing is preparing your message. So, you've just come off the diamond, you're doing the walk from the diamond to your change rooms or wherever it might be. If you're the one that's going to take the lead on that post game out of the officiating crew, the focus should be on finding those 2 or 3 key important things that happened maybe the most. Like if there's issues with rotations multiple times, well, that should be something that definitely is covered because it happened multiple times throughout that 7-inning ball game. If it's situation handling, game management handling, that type of thing. So those key decisions that happened during the game that affected, you want to have 2 to 3 things that, maybe you start off saying, hey, Frankie, can you tell me 2 or 3 things that we did really well as a crew? And then, that happens. And then, if I'm working with Frankie and Terry, it's like, Frankie, can you give me one thing that we did really well? Terry, what do you think what do you think that we did really well as a crew? And then on the flip side, what are one thing that you think we could have improved on as a crew? Or individually, what is the one thing that you could have done to improve individually from your game? And I apologize for this being blocked out. The very bottom just says, avoid the yes, no answers. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in the next slide. We want this to be a discussion. We don't want it to be a grilling or interrogation or anything like that. We want it to be a positive experience because that goal is improvement and it's a teachable moment. So we want to start off with those 2 to 3 positive things to start with. It creates a bit of a non-threatening environment when we start off with, Frankie, I thought you did this really well. I thought you handled the coach really well in the 5th inning when he came out and argued about the obstruction play or the interference call or whatever it might be. You want to provide them with some positives. And then asking those open-ended questions creates that non-threatening dialogue. And it's a simple way of just how you phrase it. So some people might phrase something like, did we do anything wrong out there? Or could you tell me what we could have, did we do anything wrong out there? So Frankie could just be like, no. There's that one word, no answer. But if I reword it and say, Frankie, could you tell me what we could have done better in that situation with the interference call? She can't really answer that in a one-word answer, right? It opens it up to be a dialogue and a discussion. To answer the question fully, she has to say more than just a one-word sentence or one-word phrase. And the whole key on the discussion is to balance the positive with the challenge to improve. Again, the intent of a post-game debrief or a discussion is to improve the umpires, including yourself, and our officiating skills. So we want to provide some positives, but we also need to challenge each other to improve our skills. The 4th topic is kind of exercise sensitivity. Because the goal of the post game is to help others and help ourselves improve, we don't want to get into that ego or power trip situation. We never want to debate something. Like we don't want to get into debates about things. We want to try to avoid those. Frankie, you should have done this, because now I'm attacking Frankie rather than, again, phrasing by, Frankie, I thought you could have handled it this way, or how do you think you could have handled that situation differently? Did you like your positioning that you were in on that? What position could you have been to get a better look at that call or to get a different look at that call? And again, it's how you phrase the wording leads to that positive growth opportunity that we want. And the last topic is kind of knowing your audience. Again, if you're working with some younger officials, maybe and when I say young, I mean maybe less experienced, you want to make sure that if you're taking charge of that discussion, you're going to maybe address them a little bit differently. You're going to focus on those main themes that have occurred throughout the game. Positioning, or maybe not judgment, but like positioning, game management. On a younger plate umpire or a less experienced plate umpire, you're going to talk about consistency, some of the main topics, rather than bogging them down with like 15 different topics of little pinpoint corrections. You're going to focus on the big ideas rather than the small things. If you're working with more experienced partners, like if I'm going out there with, a Frank Omo and a Frankie Billingsley, again, those are two international level umpires that I can learn from just as much as they can learn from me. Our discussion is going to be a little bit differently. It might not be as positive at times. Like Frank and I talked a little bit yesterday about the fact that, like, if I'm working a game with a Tanya Rabalkan-Zanin, who I've worked with our time in BC and in Alberta, I've probably worked hundreds of games with her. I'm going to give it to her straight up. I'm not going to hold back and say, I'm going to tell her if she, sucked out there that night, right? Kind of thing, right? Like, and I'm going to give her some reasons or ways that she can improve herself. And she'll give it right back to me because we've got that rapport and that relationship that, give it to me straight. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't, beat around the bush. What did you think? Good, bad, otherwise. Be honest, right? And when you're working with individuals that you have that relationship with, that communication in that conversation looks a little differently than if you're working with people that you don't know as well, or people that are maybe less experienced that you don't have that relationship with. One of the toughest situations you might run into is the official who thinks they make no mistakes and they resist the criticism of it. And we've seen it whether you've supervised or coached or been on the diamond worked with those individuals. Just understand that those officials, they'll never meet their full potential with that attitude. The officials that are willing to listen and take feedback and decipher the information given to them and determine what works best for them will be the ones that will further their growth and reach their full potential. I know growing up and coming up through the system over the last 20 some years of umpiring, I've learned so much from listening, being a fly on the wall in the dressing room, listening to other crews talk about situations or other officials, because the way that Daryl Helmer handles a situation, or Frank Omo or Frankie Billingsley, the way that people handle those situations might be way different than how I might handle the situation because of our personalities. And I can learn from them. And even Frankie, after next year's Olympics, which is kind of like the pinnacle of our umpiring, she still, when she comes back from Tokyo, will never have experienced everything that she can experience on the diamond. We as officials need to remember that we're always learning. So our last game that we've called, we're always in the learning mode. So the know-it-all official tends to show their insecurities through their arrogance. And we as umpires need to recognize that. Part of our officiating is how we handle people, right? When we handle coaches and players. So you maybe have to use a little bit of psychology and a little bit of phrasing to let them get their walls down so that they're not so guarded, and open up that lines of communication and that discussion so that we can have a positive growth opportunity, a teachable moment opportunity there. We never want to get in that, again, power trip ego situation where we're debating things and stuff like that, because that doesn't contribute positively to anything. Two little last slides I want to talk about. This one is just more so like sometimes there's no opportunity for a crew debrief, right? Maybe you have to go back-to-back games because of doubleheader. So you don't have that opportunity because of changing and all that stuff of that to have that debrief for that game. Again, you can get a good solid debrief done in 3 to 5 minutes if you are on task and focused using your routine. So it could be the walk to and from the diamond when you're away from the participants. That could be part of your debrief. There are still some options to improve. Again, I always talk about this ability to self-analyze and critique your officiating. In order to be your best, that's a valuable skill that you need to learn. You need to be honest with yourself. Before your game, you want to identify 1 or 2 things that you want to focus on for that game, and then reevaluate that after the game. You might, if I'm working with Frankie in a 2-umpire system, I might say, hey, Frankie, I'm on the plate. I really want to work on my timing tonight. Can you watch my timing to make sure that I'm not calling the pitches too quickly, or, whatever it might be like that. And again, giving her the heads up that that's what I want to focus on, so that, again, you're able to reevaluate afterwards quickly. She can just be like, yeah, you know what? I thought your timing was a little quick tonight. Make sure you track that ball right to the glove. You see it into the catcher's mitt with your, slight little eye movement, or, tip of your nose as you pulled into the glove, right? She can give me that feedback that will help me improve. When I was an active official in the Western Hockey League, we used to have little notebooks in our referee bags that when the supervisor would come in after the game and give us our debrief or our evaluation, we would write down the information. And then before your next game, you would, again, open up that book and, okay, this is what I was told to work on for this game. And you can go from that way. And I've seen some officials do this at national championships as well. A little notepad with the notes so that they've got their information from the debrief. Have that support system. Again, our fellow umpires, trusted people that you trust in their opinion and their feedback. Because again, not all feedback is positive at times. So make sure that you have that support system to help you become the best possible official. The second part of that is technology. With the technology nowadays, some people use GoPros on the backstop. I know, like, even for myself, the 2019 Senior Men's Fast Pitch Championship that was up in Grand Prairie, they video or live streamed all the things. So just a few months ago during COVID, when they started to replay some of the games and that, it was up on the YouTube. That was the first time I was able to actually watch my game that I worked the plate on after the fact, right? Because we didn't really debrief much after the final game of the championship, because I had to go out and do my fitness testing right after. There obviously were, packing up and clearing out of the dressing room, all that stuff of that. So we didn't really have a chance to do a really solid debrief of the championship final. So I was able to look at that video and watch my plate officiating over, so that I had that opportunity to, again, critique myself. And I noticed that I have a little bit of a lean sometimes. When I would go down, I'd lean a little bit, so now I can work on that, making sure that I'm going down straight or vertical. Again, video is a great thing. Maybe you have a friend or family member present that can record you with an iPad, cell phone, whatever it might be, to look at your plate stance from the side angle or whatever it might be. And the last 2 little things, communication, right? When we're doing these post-game debriefs or discussions, we want to treat it similar to a presentation. We want to treat the pre and post-game with the respect that it deserves. Be aware of your body language, your tone of voice, the words you use, so that, again, it's professional. And recognize that situations reveal character. So we're always going to have opportunities to learn. Even our most experienced international level, top elite officials in the world make mistakes. And, Frankie alluded to that a little bit during our conferencing webinar with some of the clips that were from that tournament, right? Those are a lot of our Olympic crew that there are situations that could be improved on. And we as umpires need to be able to take that feedback or advice seriously in order to get better. And if I'm working with Frankie and I've given her some feedback for her to work on, and then a month later we're working a game again and I see that she's taken that feedback and improved herself, I want to make sure that I reinforce that. Hey, I noticed you really are working on your timing. You really slowed down on your pitch calling. Great job. Keep it up. It goes a long way to fostering that team concept that we want as a I want to say brotherhood, but that's not necessarily the right term, but like as a team, we're the third team out there that we are all trying to get better. And that's ultimately the intent of the post-game discussions.
Thanks, Chris. I think that just before we get to our last slide, for level 1, 2, and 3 officials, I think the post game is really great to help determine why things might not have gone smoothly. For the level, 4 and 5 official, I think you should already know when things didn't go smoothly. The post game is an opportunity for you to bring things up and for the evaluators to help identify why those things might not have gone smoothly. The level 1, 2, and 3 might need someone to identify what didn't go smoothly and how it could be better. A level 4 and 5 should be able to identify what didn't go smoothly, and maybe someone can help them figure out how to make it better. I think once you get a seasoned level 5 and beyond, you should know what didn't go well and why, and maybe an evaluator can help you to prevent it from happening again. That's what I think the post game is helpful for at the 3 different stages. Anyway.
Yeah, definitely. So like I kind of alluded to, while the pregame and the postgame kind of seems trivial or minor, right? Their importance to the success of the umpiring crew short-term for that game that you're about to umpire and the development of umpires long-term is a crucial and critical aspect of officiating that we need to make sure we dedicate and treat it with the respect that it deserves as we progress forward. Because in order to become the best possible, like Frankie says, you have to prepare for the unexpected and, plan to succeed, right? So.
And, I think I didn't mention this earlier. There is a part on every single evaluation that talks about a pregame meeting. So whether or not I will get it. Okay. whether or not somebody is watching you do your pregame or not, they can tell if your crew is prepared by the time you get on the diamond. And so you are being evaluated on that facet of your profile. So it's an important tool. So I hope that we've given you some things to think about, or things that you want to incorporate, things that that you'll at least, the next time they happen, you might think, oh, I wish I had talked about that with my partner. And I just want to put a little shout out. I know Chris and I were fast pitch umpires. I did reach out to somebody from the slow pitch community. I didn't have a chance to connect well enough with them to embed anything particular to the slow pitch game, but I would say a lot of the content is relevant to the slow pitch game. But I would say it's probably even more important in the slow pitch game to spend some time working on a pregame, because the bulk of your games are done on your own. And then all of a sudden, when you're in a very important championship, when you're trying to progress, you're being asked to work with 2 or 3 other individuals when you're not only are you not accustomed to doing that, but you might not know them on top of that. So very important for you to spend some time on this as well.
Yeah, and definitely we wanted to, again, we did give a bit of a shout out earlier on. This topic was covered by Softball Canada as part of the Blue Connections earlier this summer. That's available through the Softball Canada YouTube thing. We had been asked by Lynn Muse after our last webinar this was a topic, and we are always open to topics from our membership to that. So, I know there has been some stuff covered by some of our umpires from across Canada through the Blue Connections online webinar series that they ran this summer. So feel free to check that stuff out. We will be trying to get a picture of the Softball Canada a couple years ago came out with a pregame checklist card. And our hope is to put that up on our ASUA webpage or through our social media platforms. That's a great starting base. Like Frankie said, she developed her pregame over the last 15, 20 years. The one that Softball Canada has provided at national championships a few years ago, and that they talk about in that Blue Connection, is a very valuable resource tool as well. That again, you can create your own per se that way. So again, we are going to open it up now. We'll unmute people so that if they wish to ask any questions of us, they can. Again, if you have any questions or comments or ideas for future webinars, please reach out to us by email at education@asua.ca. I don't know, Frankie, do you want to add anything else before I unmute our individuals?
No, go ahead and we'll see if we get any questions, and then I just have a. This webinar is kind of bittersweet for me since we're still recording, because other people will watch after. I'm not sure how well known this is, but I'm already situated in Ontario right now, and I'm starting a new position at York University. Well, I started today, but remotely. So this is the last webinar that Chris and I will be conducting together. So it's been absolutely amazing working with Chris. I think we've done some really amazing work. I know that Chris will continue to carry the ball with whoever is on his team. And I really thank you to everybody out there who's provided us feedback with content and questions and future ideas. Chris and I, our webinars really hit it out of the park. I'm really proud of the work that we've done. And Chris, you've just been such an amazing partner to work with. So I'm going to miss working with you.
Yeah, and obviously right back at you. You know, this might be your last official ASUA webinar, but we can always maybe bring you in as a special guest presenter or something down the road for sure. But
would be my pleasure.
Yeah. So again, if you have any questions, again, everyone's unmuted or has been asked to unmute. If you don't have a question, feel free to stay muted. But again, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, we'll open up now to any questions that people might have. Frank, do you have a question or?
No.
Oh.
You can you can mute me.
Mute you? Okay. Is there any questions out there? Feel free to ask if you do. Again, we appreciate you guys taking the time tonight to join us. If there's no questions, we can definitely sign off here. And like I said, on behalf of ASUA and stuff, I don't know, Terry was hoping to be on tonight, but he said he might have another commitment. But you know, definitely thank you to Frankie for all of her contributions to our province, and we wish her success in Ontario and obviously next summer with the Olympics, stuff like that. So, but
thanks, Chris. I wish you all the best in this portfolio and getting your international certification next year. And to everybody on the call and everybody who might watch later, I think everybody has my cell number, so keep in touch and my email address, and I look forward to hearing how everybody's umpiring journey goes, whatever that might look like. Oh, okay, that's really good to know. Thank you for the comment. For those of you that are in the chat, there's a comment about the slow pitch side the slow pitch side doesn't seem to emphasize pre-games that much. So,
and you know, to be honest, no one's really emphasized pre-games to me on the fast pitch side growing up. Like there wasn't much talk about that. You know, like when I first started out, you know, it wasn't like a huge, like I said, people called it trivial or minor. Like it's just, oh yeah, it's just, you know, get dressed and get out there, right? Kind of thing. You know, like Frankie said, because you are one umpire system in slow pitch majority of the time, except for major tournaments or something like that where you might go to 2, 3, 4 umpire system, the importance of that pregame becomes more important than us as a fast pitch. But I know if I go from 2 umpire system and then go to a championship where we have 3 or 4 umpire system, you know, we always spend time learning or reviewing the 3 umpire system when we make that transition during a tournament, because those are the systems that we don't work a lot of unless you typically volunteer or put yourself in those situations to work those type of systems throughout your season to prepare yourself for your championship. So I know Alberta does a really good job of that for the most part of, you know, when you're going away to a national or some of that, you try to find situations where you can jump on the field and do some 3 umpire system or 4 umpire system to get that practice. But, you know, especially when you are, you know, going from a 2 umpire system primarily in fast pitch to a 3 or 4, you know, the pregame becomes even more important because sort of a side story, my very first Baseball Canada National Championship, the Quebec umpire that was my roommate had been to like 12 national championships, and I was at my first, but they never worked the 3-umpire system for baseball in Quebec ever. And, you know, he didn't know where he was going. So we had to do a serious debrief, especially with the language barrier, because he didn't speak English that well. We had to make sure we do that. And even then there's times on the field that we had to kind of ad lib and, you know, fill holes because he wasn't going in the right direction. It doesn't, you know, it just shows the importance of making sure that you're all on that same page, or hopefully the same page, because it will show up, like Frankie says, on the diamond when you're being watched, whether you're prepared or not.
Well, and just to piggyback on that, Chris, I guess I should have, it's not something that is prevalent or talked about a lot in fast pitch either. But somebody like Carrie, you just mentioned that this became obvious to you at a men's championship, at a men's Canadian championship, when there were breakdowns. That's exactly what happens on the fast pitch side too. People go to their first provincial or their first Western, or Dennis, Dennis, nice. When people go to their first championship, and that's exactly what happens when people are at their first championship, or they're at that next level, and things happen in a game, and it's like, okay, the only way we could have prevented that is if we actually spoke before the game. And then the other thing that happens is you come home from these championships and you look at your evaluation, and you'll notice that there's a pre-game component on there. And if your games go smoothly, you might get a decent score there. But if some things happen in your game, one of the things that they'll ask you is, what did you talk about in the pregame? And oftentimes that's where it will become evident that maybe there wasn't a conversation, or the conversation wasn't fulsome enough. So unfortunately, officiating is one of the best areas in the world where the growth mindset is so important, because the growth mindset talks about embracing failure as a way to learn, because unfortunately they're just really, the best way to learn in officiating is by making some mistakes. But we just really haven't talked a lot about pre-games. So I was glad that Softball Canada did a presentation. I was really glad when Lynn wanted Chris and I to do this, because this is really a topic that I care deeply about. I've spent a lot of time talking to people in the Edmonton and District Association about, I've asked people to listen in on my pre-games. And in basketball, this is absolutely mandatory. It is mandatory to be at the game an hour in advance to talk about, you know, all the different things that we do. And so I just kind of brought that over to softball, and it's been really helpful to me. So thank you for the comments to those that are chatting about it, and thanks very much for coming. I look forward to working with you all in maybe a bit of a different capacity, or maybe on the diamond someday in a different province.
So if there's last call for any questions that someone might have. If not, feel free to leave the meeting. Have yourselves a great evening. Stay safe out there. And we appreciate you joining us tonight. And this will be posted up through the social media platforms like the other ones, so that you can review it when you're a bit more active on the field, potentially, after this COVID situation. So,
Yeah.
So thank you for everyone. And again, have yourselves a great evening. And thank you again, Frankie, for all your hard work, and stay safe and healthy, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody. All the best.